Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our evening program. We're so pleased to have Bill Ford, Executive Chairman of Ford Motor Company, join us this evening for a conversation with Ceres President and CEO Mindy Luber. Bill Ford has been a global leader in promoting business sustainability for decades, and he's walked the talk. Under his chairmanship in 2000, Ford Motor Company released its first corporate citizenship report, which analyzed the economic, environmental, and social impact of the company's products and operations around the world. In that report, he wrote, "Sustainability issues are neither incidental nor avoidable. They are at the heart of our business." That idea may seem like enlightened conventional wisdom today, but at the time, it was seen as either visionary or heretical. In recent years, he has championed the company's investment of tens of billions of dollars into the development of electric vehicles. And so now, to open our conversation with Bill and with Mindy, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Bill. Ford Motor Company and Ceres have been on this journey for decades together. How to integrate sustainability into capital markets, into the automobile sector. And I would say not an easy journey. These are complicated issues. But Bill, you've been a voice of progress and a visionary leader for a long time. So I want to dig in and take this time to get your best thoughts about where we're going for the future. You know, we know that we are coming out of a tough year on so many fronts, with very many issues to be looked at, many lessons to be learned. One thing we know from 2020, it highlighted in every way that we are an interconnected world, that many issues that we face as a society depend on each other. We saw how a public health emergency, the climate crisis, and deep social inequities can interact to compound a problem and to amplify their impacts. I think we also began to realize that actions taken to address one crisis impact the other. How are you as a corporate leader thinking about those larger issues? And they definitely impact your industry, and we'll get to those in a few follow-up questions. But how ought we take the lessons we've learned and look at the interconnectedness of climate, of race, of public health, and how do we build out of this?
Well, thank you, Mindy. Thanks for having me this evening. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you and to talk to your audience. You mentioned, you and I have been at this a long time. And it's really interesting. I was thinking about this, prior to, going on air with you. I mean, to paraphrase the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it's been. I mean, I remember, many years ago, when Bob Massey, who actually I went to school with, was running Ceres, and I met with Bob, and my whole staff freaked out, and just the fact that I was meeting with him, and what I really came away from that very first interaction with Ceres was I agreed with him, but I didn't know what to do about it. Everything that he was saying and kind of urging me to do and to think about, I realized what a chasm there was between what he was saying and where our organization was and where it was headed. And I realized at that point that, my own values didn't really align with the corporate values, and that I really faced a moment of truth. Like, what am I going to do about this? And so, that kind of began, the long journey between Ford Motor Company, and particularly myself, and Ceres. And then, as I said, you and I have been at this, for a long time together as well. And I just want you to know, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, how much I appreciate our interactions over the years, because you've certainly held our feet to the fire, as you should have, over a number of issues. But unlike a lot of the other environmental advocates, you also encouraged us and encouraged me and thanked me when things were actually going well. And that, seems so basic, but frankly, it wasn't universal by any means. I think a lot of the environmental groups looked at me kind of as a wolf in sheep's clothing, or they just didn't think that it was ever enough. And didn't realize that, in a big company and big industrial company, you have to take steps. You can't just leap to the end line, like I think I would have liked, and like I think most people would have. So I think of you, and I think of people like Sister Pat Daly, who over the years, pushed us, prodded us, and in some cases whacked us over the head, but also encouraged us, and it was so important. I mean, I remember, back around the turn of the century when, we completely redid the Rouge plant in Michigan, took the world's largest brownfield plant and made it the world's greenest plant. And there was sort of a resounding silence from the environmental community, except for you guys, who said, that's great, really well done. Same thing with, when we kind of started to push our values into the supply chain. Again, there wasn't a lot of encouragement, but there was from you guys. You didn't always agree with everything we were doing. And when you didn't, you let us know. But I really just want you to know how much I appreciate that. And then I was also thinking, until very recently, being an environmentalist, particularly in the auto sector, was really hard because it basically meant you had to be against everything. You really couldn't be, and our products were, if you wanted to drive a green product, you had to compromise. I remember the early green products, just meant you had to have the slowest 4-cylinder vehicle with roll-up windows and no air conditioning. And not many people wanted to do that. And I get that. And so, it was frustrating. It was frustrating from the consumer side, and it was frustrating from our side that we couldn't give people what they wanted. And now fast forward, I think it was sort of when we introduced the hybrids into our bigger vehicles like the F-150, and people realized, wow, I don't have to give up anything, power or performance, and I can have a much better fuel economy vehicle. And that was sort of the very first time, I think, sort of the green effort and the product came together. And now, of course, we're all headed to an EV world and an EV future, which I think is great, and a carbon neutral future, which I think is great. And so, it's been a really interesting trip, and I'll finally answer your question, but I just wanted to say, thank you for everything you guys have done to both kind of point out to us where we need to go, and also encourage us when we're making the right steps along the way. Because as I say, that was unusual and very much appreciated. And frankly, it really quieted the voices down within our company who said, we can never make any of these people happy, that they're always going to be against us. And you prove that isn't true. And so thank you. Now, this last year and the coming together of everything, it's really been, I think, a learning process for all of us. And you point out all the various societal factors that did come together this year. And of course, we were living them, as were you. Whether it was the social injustices or the environmental area, and also the public health area. And yes, they all came together in a way that, I think, and I'll speak very selfishly for Ford, in some ways really worked for us. And in this way, we have values as a company, and those values are the most important thing we have. And so, even going into this, we had stood with California in the environmental policy issues when most of our competitors didn't. We signed it. I think we're the only full auto manufacturer to sign up to the Paris Accord. And when COVID hit, we quickly turned our plants over to making PPE equipment, and nobody had to ask, is this okay? And nobody asked me, is it okay because we don't know how we're going to lose money on this. The short answer is just go and go as fast as you can, because, as a company, we have to do the right thing. And the nice thing is our employees knew what the right thing was. So we didn't get bogged down in the kind of issues that, well, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to just, who's going to pay for the distribution? Who are the customers? We just said, let's go, and let's go as fast as we can and do as much as we can. And it was great. I think it was great for our employees to see that in action. And so I think values going into this past year really allowed at least our company to come out of this past year, whether it was on environmental issues or social issues, which, again, we're not perfect by any means, but we addressed honestly and very deeply within our company, and then also on the health issues. So, in some ways it was a horrible year, but in some ways for us it was a year of validation that our values actually matter and that they can get you through a really tough time.
Well, values do matter. I hope people do appreciate how you all stepped in. That was not a small act. I don't know what it cost the company, but like you, I'm sure it was in every way good for the company to do, despite the clear financial output. You said two things that I want to follow up on. The first is how we need to integrate environmental, social, and equitable issues into everything a business does, that they're not just one-off little teams of people who are working on something. They're part of a bigger picture. And I'd love to know how that plays out within the company, and probably then get into, unsurprising, the issue of climate change. You've been a consistent
Sure.
and powerful voice with regard to climate and transportation. What's the vision for the future of transportation? We are now hearing and believing that it will look very different in 2035. Maybe at the latest, and maybe even sooner in Europe. Where are we going with the automobiles, small, medium, and large? And what should we start planning for and expecting?
Well, so Mindy, this is, I've been at this, I hate to say this, over 40 years as a career. And this is the most optimistic I've ever been. I wish I was 40 years younger and just starting out, because I think for the first time, the values that I hold personally and the values that I hope that our company always displays can actually deliver on those. It's funny. We could pick a date. We could say 2025. We could say 2035. Whatever date we pick will be wrong, but let's just say the future, because the future is happening fast. And so what will that look like? Well, it'll certainly be an EV future for all vehicles, big, large, and small. We're starting with the Mustang and the F-150, which, and in terms of electrifying them. And so, it's not the old way of thinking where you start with the small vehicles and then kind of incrementally hope that the bigger vehicles can get there. This is actually quite different. We're going right to the F-150. We're going to electrify it. It's going to be great. And I think our customers are going to absolutely love it and find that it has real advantages over internal combustion engines. So by 2035, and I guess that's as good a date as any, I think we'll see a very much of an electric future. We'll see an autonomous future, but maybe not completely, certainly by then, but it will be well underway, which should mean a safer future and maybe fewer vehicles on the road as vehicles have more uptime. Because right now, most private vehicles sit most of the time. And I think the AV world, I think the ownership, individual ownership won't be as high, and people will want access to these vehicles. And so they'll be running many more hours a day, which means you'll need fewer of them. It's interesting. I gave a TED talk 10 years ago now, talking about some of this, and it's all happening. And I'm very excited by it. I think, in terms of other things that we'll see, we'll start to see carbon neutral facilities all around the world. So it won't just be the vehicles, it'll be how they're made. And that's really fun and cool. And I'm very excited about that. In fact, we just announced a carbon neutral facility in South Africa that we're making a big expansion in. And so it's possible, and I think technology has enabled and will enable all these things to happen. Just as we were just talking about a minute ago, how years ago we couldn't deliver it because the technology wasn't there. Well, it is there and it's coming. So I think you're going to have a very connected vehicle universe, vehicles talking to each other, vehicles talking to the infrastructure around them to find the safest way, the quickest way, but also EVs and AVs. Will we have things like hydrogen as well? I don't know. Maybe. Hydrogen has always sort of been the fuel of tomorrow. And there's certainly some really interesting applications for it. But until we can get hydrogen mass produced in a sustainable way where we're not using hydrocarbons and then find a way to distribute it in a way, I think it will play second fiddle to electrification.
So you said you said many things, and I could follow up on much of it, but I will not. It sounds like you feel like the technology is there to get us to a non-combustion engine future. What are the biggest barriers? What will stop us from reaching that goal in, as you say, pick a date, 2035, maybe sooner if possible? What are the big barriers you need to get over? And then I want to talk a little bit about the policy initiatives that might help you get there.
Yeah. So I think in the short term, there'll be some customer questions around EVs. Do I really want these things? Range anxiety. If I want to take my EV from Detroit and drive it down to Florida, can I do that? Because I can do that today in my internal combustion engine. So I think initially there'll be some customer hesitation, but as more of them get on the road and as their friends and family start getting them, I think that will dissipate. And I think the battery technology will continue to get better so that the range issues. But the biggest thing, I think, is going to be the build out of the infrastructure, which we'll get to policy in a second, because that has to happen, and it has to happen pretty quickly, because otherwise those fears become real. If you want to take your EV on a long range trip, you don't want to have to worry about where can I plug this in? How long is it going to take me to plug it in? Today I can go to a gas station, throw a hose in, and be out of there in 10 minutes at the most, after I pay and, buy some stuff at the counter. So we have to build out the infrastructure in a way we as a country do, and as a, not just US, but as a globe, we need to build out the infrastructure in a way that really makes it easy for people to convert over to EVs.
Well, we got to get on that. And there's no question the infrastructure build out is crucial. We're seeing it being discussed and debated. Clearly, it has to be a partnership between private and public sector, and there'll need to be policy changes. I mean, as you said, company by company, individual companies can do a lot. But until we have critical policy changes, we might not be able to get there. So you've worked closely with policymakers and regulators. You've worked to reduce emissions from your sector. Going forward, what are the key issues and priorities that Ford Motor Company, that you personally and that other automakers want to prioritize with policymakers to ensure that we get to the end goals that you want? And we certainly, from the outside, want to bring in other supporters, other companies, other sectors, your investors into that policy debate. But what do you see as most essential to move us forward?
Well, so I would say first, the most essential thing is a willingness on the policymakers to make this future possible. And I think in this administration, we clearly have that. It's really hard when trying to define a future that we've been talking about becomes so politically charged that nothing gets done. And one of the things that I've been most kind of sad about really over the past, X number of years has been the fact that, we can't seem to come together on anything, and much less big sweeping policy issues that we need as a society to move forward. And that everything gets so politicized into right, left, Republican, Democrat, that everything just freezes. And I think we have an opportunity now to break that logjam. At least I hope we do. And I'm not naive enough to think that it will disappear, but it won't. It probably never will. But at least there'll be enough momentum to move forward. And as I said, I'm very optimistic that the current administration is willing and able to talk about, so what are the big policy issues? Well, we've been talking about one of them already, and I'd say probably the biggest one is infrastructure build out. That's huge. And as we talk about as an American economy, we talk about an infrastructure bill. Well, we desperately need kind of what I would call the old infrastructure, which is better roads and seaports and airports. We need to modernize those, and that's great. And that will put people to work, and we need them. But we also, as part of infrastructure, need to think about future infrastructure and the build out, in our case, of the EV network. That's really important and critically important. And the nice thing is, the administration, I think, understands that. And so I think they'll be real advocates for that. And then finally, we want to continue to put jobs in America. Ford has been the most American car company. We have the most hourly workers. We build the most product here. It's cost us to make that decision. We're at an economic disadvantage against some of those who have made other choices. But I think the administration is really resolved to marry those two. How do we create more jobs in this country and also move down the policy field to get to a cleaner and easier future for American auto buyers in our case. And obviously there's many more industries that will weigh into all this. But so for us, it's really, starts with the administration being willing to tackle this, and they are. And then the second is, what do we need? Well, in our case, we need EV build out, and we need, to keep the jobs in America, because the jobs will change. So, as today, the old model of American autos was pretty clear in terms of what we did, what we build, and what we sold. Well, that's all changing. And things like battery production and battery cell production, those are yet to be built out. And we would like them to be in this country. And so, and I know the administration does too. And so those are the kind of things that we'll be talking to them about, and very hopeful that we'll make progress on.
Great. There's no question that it has been full speed ahead by this new administration. We've had dozens of meetings, not only on the transportation sector, but every sector. I think there is a clear understanding and commitment to dealing with what is perhaps one of the greatest crises face us, and one that we can still have an impact on if we act now. If we move slowly, we'll miss that opportunity. So now really is the moment in time. As a company, not only have you stepped out on policy in impressive ways in the state of California, which we could come back to, but you've made a commitment to a net zero future by 2050. The company's also made a commitment to adopt science-based targets. So it's not a general commitment, but it's very clear, built off of this important thing, as we all know, called science, not a bunch of different opinions. Getting to that net zero future in a sector that is the highest emitting sector in the world, and clearly it's going down, but presently, how hard is it going to be? What do you need to do? What's the model that you need at Ford Motor Company to meet what are now stated goals, ambitious goals, audacious goals, admirable goals, but you've got a supply chain around the world. You've got a business model that is still centered on gas-fired or gas-powered vehicles and larger vehicles. excuse me, and no doubt you've just told us that's changing. But moving from here to there is a Herculean task. What's the plan for getting there so we can sit and cheer you on? Or more importantly, help get the right policy incentives put into place. Like you, we need to do several things. One is bring that carbon footprint down of your company and the industry. But your point about building back better and making sure we're building out new infrastructure, new systems, and creating the right jobs in the United States is a crucial piece of it as well. Big task. What's on your plate? How do we get there?
Well, we can get there, and I'm very confident that we can. And I kind of going back to what we said earlier, technology is enabling a lot of this. And so, for instance, 2050. That's interesting. I've heard people say, "Well, why don't you go faster?" Believe me, our goal is to go faster.
Right.
But one thing as a company that I've learned over the last 25 years, watching ourselves, but also watching others, and particularly watching others in the last 4 or 5 years, it's easy to put dates out there and then miss them. And then there seems to be no kind of remorse over that. When I watch some of the other companies, I mean, if you look back, there were all kinds of grand pronouncements. We're going to have autonomous vehicles on the road by 2018. We're going to have them by 2019. And even, you mentioned earlier, even our own, going back 20 years ago, when we put a target out there on hybrids and didn't meet it, I learned a lesson, which is, it's better to kind of walk softly and carry a big stick, if you will, to underpromise and overdeliver. And that's really something that I think is very important for us. So if we can go faster than 2050, I promise you, we will go faster than 2050. And it's my hope that we can. So what is that based on, to your question? What kind of, why would I hope that that's possible? Well, as I mentioned, the vehicles themselves, I think, are absolutely going to be. We've already committed $22 billion for us. That's enormous to electrification, and so we're going to electrify. And we're starting with our kind of iconic, our best-selling vehicles. We're going right to them first, and so I'm very confident that will happen, and that we'll electrify our whole fleet, and that in time they'll be not only accepted, but people will love them. I mean, for instance, I'm driving the Mustang Mach-E now. I got to tell you, I was the last guy who wanted that to be called a Mustang because I didn't think it was going to be credible. And I've never had so much fun driving a vehicle. It's amazing. And so I'm trying to get everybody I can. I'm giving it to everybody I can. Say, here, take it for 3 days, and because I think once people get in it, they're going to love it. So I think that adoption will happen. I think the other piece of it, though, is the industrial piece, how we make the products, and then how we drive that into the supply chain. And so I mentioned just a minute ago, we have a big expansion of our South African plant, and as part of that, we said we're going to make this plant carbon neutral. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? Well, solar panels, for sure, and they're getting better and better and more efficient with each year. Biomass we're using down there to drive the rest of the energy, and then we're 100% of the water there will be recycled and reused on plants. So it's, again, technology is starting to enable us to do these things, and the great news is it's not just the right thing to do for society. It's actually a better business equation. If you're using fewer resources, if you are kind of a self-contained loop, if you will, it's a better business equation. So, so it's not a tough sell. Sure, maybe on day one it doesn't pay off because of all the upfront investment you have to put in. But interesting that test plant we did 20 years ago at the Rouge. A lot of those, things that we put in then, people kind of raised their eyebrows at and said, this makes no sense, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Some of them didn't, but most of them did make sense. And most of them actually made it a much better business equation. On the negative side, if you're not paying for hazardous chemical hauling away, if you're not, paying any fines for, air discharge or water discharge, if you are creating a nicer work environment, so for instance, like one of the things we do there, it's very low tech, but it's very effective, is phytoremediation, where we have fields of plants where the junk discharge goes in and what comes out the other end is drinking quality water. And it looks great. There are so many benefits to doing it this way that I think we can and will do it. And just as we drove things into the supply base on other issues, like, whether it was blood minerals or, water usage, which we've been driving through, we can do this too. It may take a little longer for the suppliers than it will for us, but if we start demanding it, and we will, then they'll come along too. So I'm very, very hopeful that this carbon neutrality pursuit is not only doable, but perhaps doable in a time frame that is going to be better than we put out. But we put that date out there because we wanted some certainty. We're quite sure we can make it by then, and then we're going to work like crazy to make it faster.
Ceres certainly agrees with you that 2040 should be the goal. The IPCC put out the 2050, and I expect it will evolve over time. But your sense of, we put out a date, but in the meantime, we're going to go as fast as humanly possible. That's what we got to do. Is your sector ready to go as well? I mean, we see more progress in Europe, less in the United States. I'm not asking you to beat up your colleagues. We are all professionals. But are we as a community ready to get there?
I actually think so. I think it's, I do. And I think that, sometimes, I look at the California equation, and, and few came with us, others held back. But now look what's happening. We have a new administration in place. The societal expectations are very clear, and guess what? Everyone's jumped on board. So, and I think that's great. I think that once it's clear that a couple companies are headed down this road, I think everyone will follow. And they have no choice, frankly. Nobody will have any choice, because if society demands it, and it's not just policymakers, it's your own employees, and frankly, the employees you hope to recruit. So, one of the reasons, people have said to me over the years, why were you so passionate about the environment? Well, when I was in college, 1,000 years ago, I was exposed to environmental thinking, which really made sense to me. And then I went back to Detroit and saw how 180 degrees they were from what I had just been exposed to. And it really struck me that unless we got on the right side of this issue, we were not going to be able to recruit the best and the brightest. They simply wouldn't want to come work for us. And if that's the case, the game's over, because any company is only as good as its people, period. And so, and I think we're sort of in that point again, where unless you get on the right side of this and can actually prove that you mean it, you're gonna find yourself on a path to nowhere, because you may win a few legislative battles, but you're going to lose the war for the hearts and minds of your own employees and also your future employees.
Let me follow up and then ask a question, but here's a little bit of sarcasm. How painful and how many scars did you have to take in California, stepping out in front of many of your colleagues in the sector? You did. I'm sure it wasn't easy. How did that all play out?
Well, it's interesting. The one really great thing was I don't have any scars from my own company. And the reason I say that is, in the past, my own views often were not shared by the senior management and often the CEO. And those scars would have been real, the internal scars. But the last couple CEOs we've had, Jim Hackett and now, Jim Farley, they're 100% aligned with where we need to go and what our values are. And that makes it so much better and easier, and we can act so much quicker. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't very popular with the prior administration. And, I had some not so great phone calls and then some when, the president came to our facility this last summer to thank our employees for all the COVID things they'd done, which I thought was very nice. And, I told our employees, look, he's the president of the United States. However you feel about him personally, we need to be very gracious, and he's coming to thank us. So that's great.
Sure.
And try and leave everything else out of it. But in that visit, he took the opportunity to, let me know that he didn't appreciate where I was going on policy, and that's okay. If you really believe you're doing the right thing, then you just have to stick to your guns. And I did believe, and I also believed this. I believed that society was going to head this way. The rest of the world was going to head this way, and it was inevitable that America was going to have to come in this direction. Maybe not in the next 4 years, maybe not in the next 8 years, who knows? But it was going to come. And, and one of the things that I tried to unsuccessfully to tell the prior administration was, look, for us, it's actually a better business decision to have to engineer everything once to a global standard than have to engineer things twice. And actually, it might have been 3 times, because you would have had an America, a USA, where California, Pacific Northwest, New England, other states, Colorado, who knows, would have gone in one direction. Other states could have gone in the sort of let's go slower direction. And now we're in this crazy thing of having to engineer for 2 different standards within our own country. And I was saying, look, that makes no sense for us or anybody else. And we would much rather engineer and plan for a tougher future, knowing that that is going to be the standard, than have this patchwork of things where, that doesn't serve anybody well. Maybe others made a different calculus. I don't know. But for me anyway, that seemed very clear.
Well, it made a difference, moved things forward, and obviously that's the direction we have to keep going in. When you look ahead to the next few years, what's the single most important action that automakers that you can take to move to a more sustainable future? And, what should society be taking to back you up? What does this administration need to do?
Well, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you articulated well before how painful it is to see issues, whether it's COVID or transportation or race, become politicized. These things are about the future of our life, our kids, our economy.
Yep.
We get to do it right or we get to do it wrong. But science is telling us what we have to do, particularly related to climate. How do we make sure we are on the audacious, ambitious path as a society, particularly as the US, to do the things you've talked about?
Well, I wish I had the magic recipe for that, and I suspect you do too, because you've been working at this for a long time and you've made tremendous progress. And I think, I'm actually, as I said, I'm very optimistic for, maybe the first time in a long time that we are actually headed in the right direction, and that we can deliver a future that our children and our grandchildren are going to be proud of. But we do have to make some concrete steps today, and I think we are as an industry, and I think the policy. I look at the administration. We've got Pete Buttigieg, who's the Secretary of Transportation, and I think he's very progressive and very much is aligned with the discussion we've been having this evening, and also creating jobs in America. So, and I think he also understands the realism of what it takes to get there. So I think he'll be a very strong proponent within the administration of doing the right thing, but also putting the steps in to help us get there. Secretary Granholm, she's from Michigan. I've known her for years. She understands this industry. But she also has a view of the future that is very much aligned with what we've been talking about tonight. So I think she'll be a big help to the administration in terms of how to get our industry aligned, and also then, what steps need to be done to make sure that, it's all doable and that we also create jobs in America. So, I look at, and I pick those two out because those are the two that, I'll have a lot of interaction with. And I feel really good about that, about both of them. So, and it's not to say we won't have battles, of course we will. But I think we're all going to be pulling in the same direction. And so I like that a lot. And I don't think that, I don't see any huge stumbling blocks other than, kind of what I get back to earlier, we've got to build out the infrastructure, particularly the charging infrastructure. And we might have some short-term customer adoption issues. I hope that's not true, but we'll see. But I'm really excited about the electric Mustang, but also the electric F-150. I think that's going to be a watershed moment.
Well, we've got to all pan out around this country, opinion leaders, advocates, consumers, and talk about the upside, the value, deal with the consumer resistance to the extent it exists. I'd like to think it doesn't exist too much, but it's our collective job to get folks there. It is clearly about the future of our kids.
And Mindy, one of the things that, I said in my kind of opening comments that I think is really important for your organization and your audience to hear, which is, I think those of us in industry, we're human beings, and therefore getting encouragement really helps, because sometimes, as I said, the environmental community, which I've always been felt a strong kinship for and felt my own values were very much aligned with, but it was hard, often to get radio silence on things that were doing well. And it was always kind of negative. And, to get positive feedback, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't, and I know you won't, stop, whacking us across the forehead if you think we're headed in the wrong direction or are too slow or, whatever. But to also balance that with encouragement and some, positive feedback, that's hugely important. And it's less so for me, I think, because I've sort of, been at this a long time, but I think it's really important for all the next generation of leaders that will be coming along behind me and in other companies to have that, and to have the balance of both the carrot and the stick.
Going forward, we've got to do everything. And no doubt your leadership needs to be noted where it was, in California policy positioning was just a perfect example of that. We don't get there. We do not get to a Paris-aligned future by 2040, where both you and I said we'd like to, without everybody on board. If this remains a Republican versus Democrat, East Coast versus West Coast issue, we're making politics the determinant of our kids' literally lives and futures. And we know that doesn't work. That's not acceptable. We're seeing it a little bit with COVID. We are talking about changes to our future that will make a difference, and we'll either get there or our kids will suffer. And frankly, people are suffering already in California and across the country. So we are with you. We need to move policy. We need to move the industry sector. Our kids want to work for companies that are sustainability leaders. And frankly, the investors that we work with, Bill, we work with about 195 investors as part of the Ceres Investor Network on climate risk and sustainability. They too need to be in your camp to push you, but help you make the right decisions as owners of the company or part owners of the company. You're right. People feel better about working for a company that has a mission. You'll attract better employees. The consumers will come around if they're not fully there. And we believe your investors really care. So let me ask you to close by really just giving us your sense of hope and what we all need to do to get there. And policy will be part of that. As you said, building back better. It needs to be about making sure we have the resources, the right jobs, equity built in, how do we make sure we're applying all of those issues to your vision?
Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of it, Mindy, in terms of what we need to do to get there. I am very hopeful that we're going to get there. And as I said earlier, the most hopeful I've been in my working lifetime. Even as the challenges have gotten more acute from a society standpoint and an environmental standpoint, I think what's risen equally fast and maybe even faster is the ability to address those. And now we have to. So, and I'm very confident that we will. I do believe that it will take groups like Ceres working with us. So you mentioned the Democrat-Republican divide. I think groups like us can help actually bridge that. So if you get industry working, hand in hand with advocacy groups, the politics sort of then gets pushed away, and it will never die down for sure, but it'll become less important. So, I can't and you can't change the shrillness of the dialogue that's happening now, which I think isn't helpful. But what we can change is aligning ourselves on the goals and then going after them together. So, and I'm very hopeful and confident that that will and can happen.
Great. Well, we stand ready to help, to bring others to the table. We've got to get there. We can get there. Your sense of hope is extremely heartening. Keep at it, and we'll look forward to taking on this journey together. Our kids deserve it. Thanks for all that you've done.
They do. Thank you, Minnie. Thank you for all you've done. Thanks.